Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
All right, today is Tuesday, December 13th is when this podcast is being released. And before we get into today's discussion, I just want to remind our audience that tomorrow, December the 14th, from 12 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will be having a live podcast recording, during which time Dr. Chris Paul and Mr. Matt Armstrong will discuss a recently co-authored article called "The Irony of Misinformation, USIA Myths Block Enduring Solutions." And during this gathering, IPA will also present some of our initiatives for 2023 and beyond. But in order to join this special event, you will need to be an IPA member. So please head on over to information-professionals.org, and there's a link in the show notes as well, and become a member if you're not a member already. We have several membership options which can fit into your budget, and you can also consider this to be a donation to IPA. We are a nonprofit, and your donation will go directly towards supporting our mission, which is to provide a forum for information professionals to interact, collaborate, and develop solutions that enhance the cognitive security of the United States and our friends and allies. Also, please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you haven't done so already, head on over to your favorite podcast app where you get your episodes, and please rate us and leave a review. This will help other people find the podcast. And now on to today's episode. My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Dr. Edgar Hollandsworth, who is the Defense Intelligence Agency Academic Chair at the Joint Forces Staff College. He teaches lessons on intelligence studies, information warfare, space and cyberspace operations, and national defense organization. Ed Hollandsworth, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks, John. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some of my experience today as a career intelligence professional and as an assistant professor at the NDU Joint Forces Staff College with the Information Professionals Association. Please note that in this podcast, I will express my own opinion. Nothing I will say today reflects the official or unofficial positions of the U.S. government, the DoD, the Defense Intelligence Agency, or National Defense University.
All right, so stipulated. So the conversation I'd like to have with you today, Ed, will cover career level officer education, the recently released JP 304, and other topics related to education. But before we get into these topics, could we please start by getting your assessment of our strategic landscape?
This is a great year, 2022, because the U.S. government, DoD, have released two cornerstone documents that really describe it well: the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy. I trust by now most of your listeners have probably had the chance to learn about these to some degree, so I won't dwell on the details here. But based on both of these documents, I do think the U.S. and its allies are really at a strategic inflection point. We're transitioning from a primary focus of combating violent extremism since 2001 to a new era of strategic competition. Powerful state adversaries like Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, just like the former Soviet Union, want to reshape what we call the rules-based international order that the U.S. and its allies established after World War II in their favor. If they are successful in doing this, they would destroy the freedom, prosperity, and security climate that the RBIO, Rules-Based International Order, has produced. So it's a threat. When I first entered the intelligence business back in the mid-1980s, great power competition was a reality of the Cold War. What was old seems to now be new again. I've stayed in this business long enough now to see the strategic landscape come full circle. For example, Russia is back to its old tricks by threatening the peace in Europe and rattling its nuclear saber. This is all very familiar. What is different this time around, I think, is that China is far more capable of projecting power than it was back then. Digital technologies have really revolutionized and expanded the forms of strategic competition by enabling operations in the information environment to include foreign malign influence, cognitive warfare, and cyber operations. Space has become a warfighting domain, and transnational threats like climate change, epidemics, food insecurity, energy shortages, income inequality, and inflation are creating really significant dilemmas for national security strategy planners. In response to US conventional force strengths in the last 20 years, we're seeing our state and non-state adversaries starting to find ways to gain certain asymmetric competitive advantages in the so-called gray zone. That's the competition below the threshold for armed conflict. For example, the most recent unclassified Director of National Intelligence annual threat assessment from February of 2022 notes that, quote, both state and non-state cyber actors threaten our infrastructure and provide avenues for foreign malign influence threats against our democracy. So the US government has, of course, responded to these developments in terms of giving higher priority to operations in the information environment. I did a quick content analysis of the publicly facing versions of the 2018 and 2022 national defense strategies, because I was curious to see if there was an emphasis change, and there was. In 2018, there were 5 references to some form of DoD line of effort to shape the information environment. In the 2022 edition that just came out, there were 14. So for students and faculty in the DoD professional military education system, these strategic challenges are now driving innovative thinking about ways and means to gain new strategic advantages using national defense strategies that integrate all of the instruments of national power. We're talking diplomatic, informational, military, and economic across the whole of government, as well as with allies and partners to sustain and strengthen our integrated deterrence. So while Russia continues to be an acute threat, the PRC has replaced Russia as our pacing challenge for the foreseeable future in this area.
Yeah, agree with all that, Ed. And I've started noticing as well a change in some of the terminology that is being used, as you referenced it in your comparison of the last 2 strategy documents. But another change that I'm starting to see is rather than integrated deterrence, I'm starting to see integrated influence as a term, which kind of has a touch point there with the evolving informational character of our national security discourse. At the top there, Ed, I gave a very brief bio, but that does not do your career justice. Could you tell our audience just a little bit more about what you've done in support of national security?
Gladly, and thank you for that opportunity. So I started my career in the government back in the mid 1980s. So I've been in the intel community for 38 years now. I started with CIA in the mid 1980s, and then I moved on after graduation from Georgetown in 1986, and I accepted my commission in the Air Force and served for 20 years as an Air Force intelligence officer, retiring in 2006. Then I joined the Defense Intelligence Agency as a civilian the following year, with some additional experience along the way during that time as a space policy analyst in the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy's office in the Pentagon. My intel background is somewhat broad, I would say, compared to many intel professionals. I've done open source intelligence, signals intelligence, measurement and signature intelligence, special communications, Russian, East European political military analysis, defense intelligence policies and strategies, intelligence program portfolio planning, and most recently I've been involved heavily in developing civilian talent management within the DIA. I also served at one point as a diplomatic assignment as the assistant air attaché to Germany from 2001 to 2004. I consider myself to be a pracademic, meaning a practitioner plus an academic. I've always been curious, and I've always pursued lifelong learning. I'm a graduate of Georgetown School of Foreign Service, the Naval Postgraduate School, University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. I went to the Army War College 2010, 2011, and Virginia Tech. In 2015, I decided I wanted to take my government career in a more academic direction and to teach our nation's future national security leaders how to strategically lead and manage government operations, and not just intelligence either. So I enrolled in the PhD program at Virginia Tech Center for Public Administration and Policy to earn my doctorate in public administration and public affairs. I feel this is a world-class graduate program, and I can recommend it to anyone considering a PhD in this field. I successfully defended my dissertation on the institutionalization of federal performance management reforms in December 2021, and I graduated from Virginia Tech just earlier this year. So just as I was finishing up my dissertation, DIA selected me to serve on a rotational tour as the DIA academic chair at the Joint Forces Staff College in Norfolk, which is one of 5 PME schools, professional military education schools under the National Defense University. And I was recently appointed as assistant professor. Here I teach master's level students, mostly at the Joint Advanced Warfighting School on cyber, information intelligence, and space considerations for joint planning and strategy development. At JAWS, I was introduced to recent developments in concepts and joint doctrine for operations in the information environment, OIE. Interestingly, before that, during my Intel career, I actually hadn't had much contact with it except for a little bit of exposure to command and control and psychological operations. So as a scholar of public management, my research focuses on how the nation governs, institutionalizes, and measures OIE organizations and programs, how the national and defense intelligence support DoD's understanding of the operational and information environments, and finally, how government leaders can make use of intelligence as an unconventional weapon in cognitive warfare.
My goodness. Okay. Well, you are overqualified for for this discussion. So you obviously have a lived experience here with military officers and education of officers, during different moments in an officer's career. So I want to talk about that a little bit more. But first, I think that there's probably some people in our audience that are not familiar with the Joint Forces Staff College. Do you think you could maybe give just a short 101 on what this college is? And then I'd love to hear from you about the kinds of engagements that you're having with the students which are coming through the college. For example, is there anything different about today's classroom environment compared to the classroom environments that you experienced, from 2000 timeframe when you were on active duty?
Sure, John. The Joint Forces Staff College is one of 5 colleges in the National Defense University, right alongside the National War College, the Eisenhower School for National Security and Resource Strategy, the College of Information and Cyberspace, and the College of International Security Affairs. The main campus for NDU, as most people know, is at Fort McNair in Washington, D.C. The Joint Forces Staff College is located in Norfolk, Virginia, not far from the naval base, and was originally chartered all the way back in 1946 as the Armed Forces Staff College. Later, it was incorporated into NDU in 1981. The name of the college was changed to the Joint Forces Staff College in 2000. All 5 of the colleges in NDU prepare U.S. and partner nation field grade and flag officers, as well as U.S. government civilian employees, for higher level leadership responsibilities and instill knowledge about the theory and history of war and advanced competency in the development of national security strategies, joint planning, and the strategic management of defense resources. All the things you need to know if you're going to be successful working in the Joint Staff or OSD or at the combatant commands. Faculty and students at JFSC engage in original research, and we do publish a lot of extensive peer-reviewed scholarship. In addition, for the U.S. military officers, if you graduate from most of the NDU schools, you can receive Joint Professional Military Education Level 2 certification. Under the Goldwater-Nichols Act, this is a requirement for any officer, any commissioned officer, to be promoted to flag rank. So the Joint Forces Staff College actually has 3 schools under it. It's a pretty complex institution. The Joint Advanced Warfighting School is where I spend most of my teaching time. It's a 10-month master's degree program. JAWS is modeled after the service's advanced studies programs and provides the Joint Staff, the combatant commands, allied militaries, and other U.S. government agencies with bona fide experts in the joint planning process who are capable of critical analysis and the application of all aspects of national power across the full range of military operations. That's a mouthful. What we're talking about really here are senior expert strategists and planners who can bring a profound level of new insight and creative thinking to very difficult national security problems. In JAWS, my primary contribution is to teach a research seminar on cyber information intelligence and space considerations for joint strategy and planning. There is also the Joint and Combined Warfighting School under Joint Forces Staff College. JCWS is a 10-week program that's offered in residence in Norfolk, as well as through remote and hybrid delivery modes. And it teaches students essential joint strategic planning system operational processes. And it fosters a sense of joint acculturation for many officers whose career up to this point might have been limited to experience within a single service. So this exposes them for the first time in many cases to the need to work cooperatively and effectively with members of all the other services. Finally, there's the Joint Command and Control and Information Operations School, and that's JC2IOS. JC2IOS keeps a kind of a low profile. Not many people know about it. It doesn't offer a degree or JPME2, but it does offer short tradecraft courses for officers, enlisted, and civilian information operations personnel. The JCWS is the leading producer of JPME2 credentialed officers in the US government. JAWS graduates are also JPME2 certified as well. So as far as my experience in teaching at JFSC, I've been at the school now for about 15 months, like I said, on a rotational assignment from DIA. So I'm not a permanent party faculty member here. Nevertheless, I've had the pleasure of engaging already several cohorts of students from the JCWS and JC2IOS, and I've taught and I've mentored students in 2 JAWS class cohorts so far. I am probably a decent person to ask about how the professional military education, or PME, classroom environment has changed over time, since I was also a graduate of the Air Command and Staff College and the Armed Forces Staff College during my Air Force time, and graduated also as a DIA civilian from the Army War College in 2011. So how do I see the difference? Well, then as now, student engagement in PME really depends a lot on how relevant the students see their education for their next assignment. Some students are really intrinsically motivated to learn just for the sheer enjoyment of learning, but I think most of the students see their education at JFSC as a critical stepping stone to the next phase of their career. So most students are motivated, I think, by the value of their JFSC education for their career development. As an incentive, I think that's fine. It keeps them moving ahead. The classroom environment has not really fundamentally changed, in the sense that students are challenged to read hundreds of pages a week and come to class prepared to engage in lively discussions and debates. We still have distinguished guest speakers who come in and share their wisdom, their technical knowledge, and their leadership experience. And we still schedule academic exercises that let students apply their knowledge to address challenges from really realistic regional scenarios. And all of these are curriculum standards now as they were then. I've noticed, though, that classroom technology has jazzed all of this up a lot since I was a student and helped to sustain student engagement. Today's joint PME students, as you probably know, they're mostly millennials. They are the first generation to grow up entirely in the internet age. So as digital natives, they prefer to learn from electronic media whenever feasible. So many of the courses at JFSC have started to integrate more enhanced content delivered through videos, web pages, and even podcasts. I've incorporated some screencasting techniques and electronic games in my lessons to create engaging learning activities on some course topics. The students seem to eat it up, and it always leads to a lot of discussion. In fact, you might be interested to know, John, that I included IPA podcasts from Lieutenant General Lori Reynolds on operations in the information environment and Chris Paul's excellent The Fire Hose of Falsehood podcast in my course plan for my JAWS research students this year. Finally, while JAWS stayed in carefully managed residence mode during the COVID pandemic, the pandemic experience gave the Joint and Combined Warfighting School an opportunity to learn how to deliver entire courses online, which was a first for the Joint Forces Staff College. So, so there have been some changes, but the fundamental purposes, the fundamental objectives haven't changed at all.
Well, all right. Well, before I forget, we'll have a link in the show notes to those 2 podcast episodes that you mentioned so that folks can go and check them out if they like. So I don't want this to come off as a cynical question, or maybe it's more of a indictment of the cohort of officers that were in the military when I was on active duty, and you at the same time, Ed. So I was on active duty from 1990 to 2010, and about halfway through that tenure, so in the late 1990s, I too went to the Naval Postgraduate School, and at that time for the Marine Corps, the going to the Naval Postgraduate School for a mid-grade officer, senior captain or a junior major, depending on what your MOS was, going to NPS was considered to be like the kiss of death. Like, oh, you're going to NPS? Well, you can forget about getting promoted beyond lieutenant colonel now, or even beyond captain, for some MOSs. And furthermore, there were some officers at NPS when I was there who would tell me just like, man, I don't want to be here. This sucks. I'm trying to get out of here as soon as I can. That kind of thing. I'm not saying that it was like pervasive, but there was, for me at least, a palpable feeling of mixed feeling of some officers really wanted to be there and were trying to get the most out of the experience, and then taking the mental toolkit that they were getting at NPS and taking that back to either to the operating forces or to the headquarters of the Navy or the Marine Corps, to apply those types of scholastics at the institutional level. But and then there were others, as I was describing, that were just like completely not wanting to be there. So I guess all of that is kind of a big lead up to ask you, do you sense any kind of motivation to be at the career level school or the top level schools these days, given our strategic landscape today compared to, say, like the late 1990s or the early 2000s, back when we were still considered to be in the quote unquote unipolar moment? Do you get what I'm asking?
So my perceptions as an instructor are maybe different than they were back when I was a PME student. And as an instructor at the Joint Forces Staff College, I have to say I'm very blessed because I'm teaching a rather elite group of officers. So all officers who are selected to come to JAWS, for example, they're all very carefully handpicked, and in fact, most of them are required to go on and do a Joint Qualified Officer duty role after graduation. So these are sort of some of the best and brightest within DoD. So I've honestly had the pleasure of working with some of the best, and attitudes such as you imparted about your time at NPS. I generally don't encounter that, but as you say, I went to NPS myself as more of a junior officer. I attended that from 1986 to 1988 to get my master's in East European Area Studies as preparation for political military analytic roles as a junior intel officer in the Air Force. I have to say that the students that I associated with when I was at NPS, by and large, were very motivated and interested in what they were studying. I do think that there are differences in terms of attitudes towards education overall. between the services that do vary somewhat. So I went as an Air Force officer, and I associated with officers from all the services. And it's true, I did notice that some of the officers from other services, which I will intentionally not specifically identify, but some officers did have sort of either apathetic or even negative attitudes towards the educational experience they were being offered. And I think to some degree that they are products of their organization, products of their institution. Some services have a stronger tradition of educating officers than others. Some services have a very stronger operational orientation, and career incentives are often driven by operational success more than educational success.
Yep, for sure.
And I can see an argument for officers being advanced and assigned in a way that acknowledges success both in their talent development and in their operational achievements. You got to have both in the officer corps. It's not one or the other. But to simply just reject the benefits of the education you're being offered and not to make the greatest use of it, considering the cost to the taxpayer and the importance of it to the nation, an attitude like that, I actually would find that kind of appalling, I have to say.
Yeah. So to our audience, we're talking about talent here today, and talent has come up over and over again on this podcast forum as one of our major projects to be sure that we get right today more than ever. So in the classroom context that you're experiencing now, Ed, what, in your opinion, are we doing right? And where do you think we can make some improvements?
So I really appreciate this question, because I think this is really kind of at the core of my interest. And I'll talk a little bit on this because I think there's a lot to talk about. And I'll just warn you right up front about that. Coming out of DIA as a talent management leader within the civilian talent development area, I agree that talent management really is a critical component of how the DoD prepares the Joint Force to address national security challenges. I keenly appreciate how important effective training and education is for both tradecraft and leader skills development. And that's what we're trying to do here. The Joint Forces Staff College is train and groom literally the next generation of senior armed forces leaders, civilian and military. I believe that DoD is really making substantial investments into the talent development of its officer corps to help the department compete in the information environment. DoD is certainly doing more than any other government agency or department that I know of in that regard. For instance, I recently asked the director of the Joint Command and Control and Information Operations School, Colonel Brad Loudon, about the training courses that DoD runs that are related to information operations, now becoming operations in the information environment, along with some other functions. I was amazed at his response. In addition to the Joint IO operations and planning courses that his school teaches here at Norfolk, the Army runs a large number of courses, including the Information Operations Qualification course at Fort Leavenworth. The Army National Guard has a similar offering through the Vermont National Guard. The 1st Information Operations Command down at Fort Belvoir offers a variety of information operations related courses, to include the Military Deception or MILDEC Planners course. The Army Special Warfare Center and School teaches the PSYOP qualification course and Special Operations Forces Military Deception course. The Army also teaches a STOW Planners course down at Fort Sill. The Air Force is no slouch either. The Air Force's 29th Information Operations Squadron at Hurlburt Air Force Base teaches a variety of information operations courses, including the IO Officer Qualification course, the Air Force OPSEC course, and a Denial and Deception course. The Air War College at the more senior level, it runs a capstone program that offers a Senior Joint Information Operations course. The Navy is also on board. Pun intended. The Navy Information Warfare Training Command at Dam Neck, Virginia teaches an Information Professionals basic course, and the Navy Information Warfighting Development Center, NIWDC, teaches the Navy Military Deception course down at Little Creek. The Naval Information Warfare Training Group out in San Diego, they also teach the Navy Information Operations Planners course and the Navy OPSEC support team in Norfolk and San Diego deliver the Navy OPSEC course. The Naval Information Warfare Training Center Command down in Corey Station in Pensacola, Florida, they teach the Navy Cryptologic Warfare Officer Basic course. And even though that's cryptologic, it also imparts knowledge of electronic warfare and cyberspace operations, in addition to signals intelligence. The Marines teach the Staff Operations course in the Information Environment Planner course, as well as basic, intermediate, and advanced MAGTAF, Marine Air Ground Task Force operations in the Information Environment Practitioners course. So there's an advanced version of that course that certifies Marine Corps officers to conduct IO planning on behalf of the service. So add to all of these specifically designed IO related courses, dozens of individual courses that all the services teach, and agencies as well that prepare members of the DoD to perform IO support roles, like Intel Support Information Operations course that is taught by my home agency, DIA's Academy for Defense Intelligence. So in short, services and defense agencies are really stepping up now, I think, to train the future joint OIE force. Still, as you asked, is there room for improvement? And I say absolutely yes. There's room for improvement in training specifically for OIE and also for intel support to operations in the information environment. I want to caution that any progress in the future in the classroom on this score is really going to depend on how well DoD senior leadership is able to move forward and institutionalize the integration of all of the information related capabilities that are conceptualized on, for operations in the information environment in the Joint Pub 3-04. I read some recent analyses by the Government Accountability Officer, GAO. These studies indicate the DoD still has a long way to go in the development of joint OIE processes before the DoD workforce can start to integrate different information-related capabilities. What are these information-related capabilities? Well, examples include MISO, Military Information Support Operations, formerly known as PSYOP, military deception, cyberspace operations, and electromagnetic warfare, operations security, as well as special technical operations into the unified OIE strategies that they're designed to support. Getting these synchronized with public affairs and civil military operations and intelligence capabilities and key leader engagements is an additional challenge that's probably at least 5 to 10 years in the future before we get to that point. So frankly, most of these information related capabilities I just discussed, they're currently pretty much conducted within their own stovepipes. So it shouldn't really come as a surprise to anyone right now that OIE training and education is still accordingly mostly conducted within their own functional stovepipes to prepare personnel to go and be successful in their next job. I really appreciate the comments of Dr. Joseph Kirschbaum of the GAO, who was also a recent participant in your podcast. He testified last year, about a year ago, that 5 years after the DoD Information Operations Strategy was promulgated in 2016, DoD leadership still had made very little progress in institutionalizing the 2016 strategy for operations in the information environment, apart from publishing several joint concept and doctrine documents. And DoD is now also accordingly revising the strategy and plans to issue an implementation plan once that strategy is approved. So a key integration challenge that Dr. Kirschbaum noted was that DoD had really not addressed the key planning, coordination, and operational challenges for integrating all of these information required capabilities. And there was also special focus that the GAO had on delineating the roles and responsibilities between U.S. Cyber Command and the Geographic Combatant Command. I know those are still being discussed and worked out, and over time that relationship should become a little clearer. So what's my personal view on this? Well, the future implementation plan for the revised strategy for operations in the information environment in DoD, it should include a high priority line of effort to develop new and expand existing joint IO training programs in order to enable future OIE planners and operators to learn how to integrate all of these different IRCs as suitable into tailored strategies for operations in the information environment in order that we can achieve desired behavioral outcomes of our competitors and adversaries, and that we will enable DoD to assess the effectiveness of OIE operations, just like we do kinetic operations through the targeting process. I do believe that DoD is still many years away from a capability to do this on a large scale, and unfortunately, probably several years behind our global competitors. That said, there are some promising recent examples of experimentation and organizational innovation that are already underway, where closer intelligence integration with OIE Intel customers is being tried. In terms of providing intelligence support to a broad spectrum of OIE functional customers, the defense intel community has already begun to reorganize itself to support multidisciplinary OIE requirements. Just one example. Army Cyber Command stood up a new cyber military intelligence group earlier this year, or actually it was about a year ago officially, formally speaking under INSCOM, but operationally it's under the Army Cyber Command. The CMIG, Cyber Military Intelligence Group, has the responsibility to direct, synchronize, and coordinate intelligence support for cyber information operations and electronic warfare operations, three of the most important OIE functions. And it utilizes commercial data and public information along with traditional intel information to give insights to the leaders of those organizations that are necessary for the Army Cyber Command to operate and defend the networks and influence foreign audiences. The website of the CMIG, I recommend people go take a look at it. It describes its operations as follows. CMIG's unique information advantage focused multidiscipline cross-specialty teams bring together intelligence and non-intelligence and network operations data from a variety of public and other sources to provide Army Cyber's Operations Center with products that support decision-making. In addition, on the Air Force side, the 16th Air Force, I think many people know that it merged the cyber capabilities of the previous 24th Air Force and the ISR capabilities of the 25th Air Force. For OIE to be successful in DoD, and for theory and practice about the integration of all information-related capabilities to develop to support OIE education and training, DoD will need to go further than integrating just cyber and ISR. I read a recent article by Dr. Joshua Sipper, and I'll give you the site for that later. He notes that effective operations in the information environment depend on the operational integration of cyber, ISR, electronic warfare, and information operations, PSYOP. I would go further than him, and I argue that it should also include military deception and operations security, and even command and control to some degree. So I truly believe that DoD has the potential to surpass all of our competitors' integration of OIE functions, and the Russians and Chinese are rather impressive in this regard. But like anything else that is important in DoD, we will need strong leadership commitment. We're going to need a clear vision and substantial resources to do the job.
All right. Wow. Well, you said a lot there. That is for sure. Thank you for such a comprehensive response. And we will have links in the show notes to some of those resources and organizations that Ed just mentioned. So you touched on this briefly a moment ago, Ed. So we recently had 3 of the principal authors and contributors and project managers for the new Joint Pub 3-04, which just came out in September of 2022. And by the way, to our audience, we're recording this in early December 2022. So that joint doctrine, information in joint operations. What are some of your key takeaways from this new doctrine?
John, thanks for sharing that podcast with me earlier this week. I think Eric Wallace, Derek Elliott, and Ron Walters did a very thorough job of describing not only the major themes in the new doctrine, but also the long-term institutional processes that generated it and related doctrinal and conceptual documents over the last decade. The new Joint Pub 3-04, it really is a milestone for the OIE community of practice. But its importance and its lifespan will depend, as I just stated, on how well the DoD strategy for operating in the information environment will be institutionalized. And as they pointed out very clearly, there are some organizational impediments and challenges that still need to be overcome within DoD. Now, from where I sit as a DIA officer and a faculty member in JAWS, really, for me, what's most intriguing to me about the Joint Pub 3-04 is towards the end, where they talk about information requirements for OIE planners and operators and how intelligence is going to be expected to support these really demanding requirements. Intel officers tend to be very customer focused because our customer success is our success. Chapter 7 of the new Joint Pub 3-04 briefly talks about Intel support to operations in the information environment. It notes, quote, the complexity of OIE requires dedicated intelligence support, unquote. OIE strategies generate very demanding intelligence requirements, without a doubt. Now, like all planners, OIE planners try to identify information gaps about the adversary and features of the commander's operating environment. OIE planners are especially interested in the information environment aspect of it. And that information environment, I think many of podcast subjects in your program have noted, contains really 3 main dimensions: informational, physical, and human aspects or dimensions of the information environment. That makes it very complicated. OIE planners seek to shape that information environment in a way that affects the decisions of relevant actors in a way that favors the commander's desired outcomes for their campaign or operations. Whatever OIE strategies are used, the Joint Pub 3-04 guides commanders to ensure they are synchronized with a well-established joint targeting process to ensure that OIE effects will complement the effects of traditional lethal fires. I think that's a really important takeaway, I think, for me and everybody from that Joint Pub. My literature review, I think, for this topic has led me into some think tank analysis. And RAND has done, last year, RAND published a very impressive study. The lead author was Michael Schwille. And the RAND team closely analyzed challenges and made quite a few recommendations to improve intelligence integration with information operations. To bridge that gap, to bridge that chasm that has traditionally existed, although there's a lot of overlap between the two functions as well. The RAND study argues that the Joint Force is still developing capabilities, undergoing a reorganization and testing concepts that will dramatically affect the future of intelligence support for OIE, unquote. I certainly agree with RAND's claim. The RAND study also found that there is insufficient support for OIE and really little emphasis on the information environment within the defense intelligence enterprise. I might challenge them a little bit. I think there's maybe more emphasis than they think, but that's their view. This hinders efforts to plan and execute operations in the information environment, and I do agree with that claim. So the RAND study also documents dozens of challenges that the OIE community and the Intel community face when working together. It offers a plethora of possible solutions and recommendations. It would take way too long to cover all of those today, but I want to hit at least one or a couple of highlights. So when it comes to planning for OIE, the RAND study observes that there's some ambiguity as to roles and responsibilities for providing knowledge of the information environment. Intelligence officers like myself are accustomed to providing intelligence analysis to military planners through a process called the Joint Intelligence Preparation of the Operational Environment, lovingly referred to as JIPOE. However, intelligence is only one source of information that OIE planners use, and in many cases, it may not be the most important. In addition, a longstanding challenge is that OIE effects in the information or operating environments, if they're not sufficiently coordinated with the Intel community in advance, well, they could have detrimental impacts on ongoing or planned intelligence operations. So OIE relevant actors could also be high-value intelligence sources. You can easily imagine the potential for harm if required coordination does not occur in a timely manner. So for the Intel community, the RAND report makes 4 sort of top-line recommendations to improve Intel support to the OIE. One is to increase awareness of information operations intelligence integration, or IOII, processes across both the IC and the IO communities, with a close focus on targeting and tasking processes. Totally agree with that. The IC should give sufficient priority to IOII support by appointing a command level or institutional champion for IOII, dedicating personnel and helping IO practitioners learn how to articulate their needs for intelligence support. I completely agree with that recommendation as well. I think that's spot on. Third, provide additional training and educational opportunities for both IO and intelligence personnel to increase their familiarity with IOII and acquire related skills and improve their understanding of roles and responsibilities. And that's kind of where I fit in, I guess, with my job here in JAWS. That's exactly what I'm doing. And then finally, the fourth recommendation is to dedicate sufficient personnel to fill some of the near-term shortages and then develop a body of intelligence professionals who are skilled in the support of operations in the information environment. So all of these recommendations seem quite feasible and suitable to me. And I think the Intel community can and should move forward on these. Naturally, the devil will always be in the implementation details, and without resources, nothing happens.
Well, this has been fantastic, Ed. I'd like to start closing out. I've got a couple of questions I typically ask, and this is going to be right in your wheelhouse there, from being for your time there as a instructor. So, what kinds of research questions could you offer to our audience, which might help someone investigate some of these challenges that we've been talking about?
Oh, certainly. Happy to do this. I'd like to propose that researchers in this field consider really a cluster of interrelated questions that really could be considered almost as a research agenda for this topic. This means each question by itself could be the focus of a separate research effort. Building on the podcasts of Major Cassandra Brooker, number 81, and John DeRosa and Alex DelCastillo, number 82, I'd like to challenge scholars in this field to ask the question, how can the US government validly, accurately, and rapidly measure the effectiveness of its operations in the information environment in time to influence leader decisions about future plans and operations? What social science methods and performance measurement models are well suited to this really complex task? How should the intelligence community posture itself to support OIE performance measurement? And downstream, what are the implications of integrated OIE strategies and the measurement of their effectiveness for the future changes in intelligence collection, predictive analysis, and finally, training and education curriculum development? Put together, I think all of those questions could be a very rich and fruitful area for future research by scholars in this area.
And finally, do you have a book recommendation or some other online resource that people might check out?
So like I say, I'm a academic. I love to read. I love to research. So I'm going to give you a couple of books, if that's okay.
Yes, it is.
So, and in fact, I almost have to, because to my knowledge, there really is no single book that covers both of the major areas that I discussed today. Starting with, though, an excellent article I can recommend that describes how cyber education and training is being adapted now and in the future inside of DoD to the new realities of operating in the information environment, is an article last year by Dr. Joshua Sipper. It's not just about cyber anymore. The multidisciplinary cyber education and training under the new information warfare program was published in 2021 in Joint Forces Quarterly. Intelligence support to specific OIE functions is, in fact, a recurring theme in several intelligence textbooks. Even though they don't refer to OIE, the functions that OIE encompasses have traditionally been customer sets for the Intel community, right? So there's been a lot of writing about how Intel supports those sets. There's been a lot of scholarship in particular on how intelligence supports the analysis of cyber threats and how it informs US and allied information operations as well as cyber operations. For those listeners who would like a basic familiarity with this literature, kind of a good starting point, I would like to recommend either of these two very recent books. The first is Mark Lowenthal's Intelligence from Secrets to Policy, the 9th edition only, 2023 just came out. And then the other one is by Dr. Amy B. Ziegart, Spies, Lies, and Algorithms, The History and Future of American Intelligence, came out this year. And then finally, for those who really want a more advanced treatment of the functional requirements for the professionalization of cyberspace operators and the associated intelligence support personnel that work with them, that is solidly grounded in strategic considerations, I don't think there's any better book that you could read than Martin Libicki's Cyberspace in Peace and War, 2nd edition from 2021.
My goodness. All right. Well, those are some fantastic suggestions. And with that, Dr. Ed Hollandsworth, thank you so much for being a guest on the Cognitive Crucible.
John, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.